The second half of this Spanish American War study is going to look at what U.S. presidents had to do and what their policies were with regard to the U.S. now becoming an imperial power after defeating Spain and taking over Guam and the Philippines and Puerto Rico and places like that. How do we use that newfound power to kind of carry out our policies around the world? And that's going to be the focus of today's discussion. So, the first thing you want to look at is what's called the Big Stick Policy under Teddy Roosevelt. And the idea here is that we would try to carry things out diplomatically and peacefully unless the person that we were dealing with did not want to do what we asked them to do. And if they didn't ask us what to do, if they didn't ask us what to do, or excuse me, if they did not do what we asked them to do, then we would basically come in with our military and force them to do whatever we were wanting them to do. So the idea of speaking softly and carrying a big stick is this whole overall idea that was used by the US for a number of years to go into country after country and basically exert our influence there. What went along with the big stick policy is called the Roosevelt Corollary. And that was the idea that the US should become an imperial or an international police force and protect pretty much everybody in this part of the world. On the Western Hemisphere, if there were US businesses in a specific place, we would go in and make sure that they were protected. If there was anybody threatening to try and mess up our business and therefore messing up our money, we would also go in there and try to restore some order so that our businesses were not losing any money. And this corollary goes directly in kind of connection with this big stick policy. And as you see some of these political cartoons, this one, it's always showing Teddy Roosevelt with the big mustache and glasses carrying a big stick with everybody else kind of following behind us. You see him pointing our big stick at European claims in the Western Hemisphere, which pretty much came to an end once we emerged as a world power. And one of those big things that happens here early on in Roosevelt's time as president is the construction of the Panama Canal. Panama, at this point, is a little small country that connects Central America to South America, was controlled by Colombia, which was a country in South America that had its influence over that particular region. Well, that wasn't good because Teddy Roosevelt wanted to somehow construct a waterway that would cut out the journey across South America for ships and for military, whoever needed to use that particular shortcut. It would cut out a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money in getting ships from one coast to the next. So we couldn't really do that unless we had the support of Panama. But Panama was not free. Panama was controlled by Colombia. Colombia was not giving us the support. So what we did in turn is say, well, hey, to the Panamanians, why don't y'all go ahead and rebel against Colombia? We'll go down there and help you in your rebellion so that Colombia cannot stay in control of your region. And then once you're free, then we can be the ones that go in and build a canal. And that's exactly what took place. As they revolted in 1903 against Colombia, the Panamanians gained their freedom. And this new Panamanian government, under what's called the Hayes Treaty, allowed Teddy Roosevelt and the United States to go into Panama and start building the canal. So by kind of encouraging an overthrow of a government and allowing our own interests to kind of be first and foremost the most important thing for us in Panama, we go in and now have the permission to build a canal. The thing is, most of the people who helped build the canal were Panamanian. And the workers that die of tropical diseases because of mosquito-borne illnesses and just simple lack of safety and things like that ended up costing, thousands of people their lives. In our eyes, it didn't really matter all that much because we were still building what needed to be built, and we were going to make a whole lot of money off of it. It took about a decade, but ultimately it was finished and built and became a huge moneymaker for the United States. And we actually stayed in control of the Panama Canal from 1914 when it opened to December 31st, 1999, when they lowered the American flag over the canal and we turned the power of it back over to Panama. And I remember that very distinctly as the last day of the millennium. That was the agreement made in the 1970s to give Panama back control of their own canal. The two presidents that followed Teddy Roosevelt, first one here with Taft, he had an idea called dollar diplomacy, which means that our diplomatic relations with other countries, his foreign policy of how we interact with others is going to be based upon trade and investing into Latin American and Asian countries, building our businesses there, trading with people in those particular regions. And that did a lot to encourage the strong economic growth of not only the United States, but also in countries where our businesses were built And that's a pretty big sticking point that you remember from Taft. Under Woodrow Wilson, you see what's called moral diplomacy, where instead of trying to fight for the almighty dollar and allowing our money sense to be what controls us, his ideas were, let's spread morals, let's spread our democratic ideas to countries around the world and allow that to become the basis of our economic growth. And spreading our democratic ideals, as opposed to always threatening people with our big stick to go in and try to overthrow them or lead a revolution or anything like that, is what ultimately allowed Woodrow Wilson's moral diplomacy to be pretty successful. For Mexico, and staying in this little particular region, in the early 1900s, there was a revolution in Mexico as the rich that were super rich were basically overthrown by the poor. There was no one more famous than a guy named Pancho Villa, who asked for U.S. help in this revolution, but didn't get it. And when he didn't get it, he instead turned his attention of kind of robbing the rich of Mexico to wreaking havoc along the U.S. border and crossing the border, terrorizing Americans, stealing their stuff, robbing them, just all in all being a huge problem. The U.S. military eventually has to get called in to help put down this kind of semi-rebellion along the border, led by what he became, which is a huge bandit named Pancho Villa. And then also in Puerto Rico, another area that we took over as a result of the Spanish-American War, we gave them their own semi-autonomy to allow them to pretty much do their own thing. We helped a lot with the infrastructure of their island, and eventually passed what's called the Jones Act, which gave the people of Puerto Rico citizenship, but they didn't have all the rights associated with being a U.S. citizen. For example, today, the people in Puerto Rico cannot vote in a U.S. presidential election, nor do they have anybody representing Puerto Rico in the U.S. House of Representatives, but they are still protected by the United States and still kind of under our watch as almost like a territory of the U.S. They always vote every year or every few years of whether or not they want to become the 51st state of the U.S., and they resoundingly always vote no. So it's an interesting idea of how it works for Puerto Rico. And then the final place we go on this discussion is China. As you can kind of see in this political cartoon, the representations of these characters, this being England, this being Germany, potentially Russia, this being Japan. Everybody's kind of carving up little parts of China to say, this is going to be my quote unquote sphere of influence. And everybody in this particular region is going to be doing business with our country and our country only. Only England can build businesses in that area. Only the people of that area can trade with England. As the same thing goes with the Germans, the Russians, the Japanese. The person missing at this table getting to carve up China is the United States. And with China being the most populous nation in the world, populous country in the world, we wanted a piece of that pie. We didn't get one, though. We didn't have one, though. That's a problem. We want to sell our goods to the people of China, but the Europeans have pretty much already locked that down. Well, that changes here. With President McKinley in 1899, he instituted what's called the open door policy, which says that anybody and everybody can trade anywhere and everywhere in China. And if anybody wants to stop us and prevent us from doing that, well, we got our big stick. And if nobody in none of these countries here wanted to challenge us with our big stick and have to face the U.S. military. So we told everybody can trade anywhere in China. There's no more restrictions on where, and it allows for free trade, which again allows for the rapid growth of U.S. economic goals and how much money we're making because we're selling all of our goods now to China. And that was a big connection here. The open door policy, you will absolutely see that again. So that's the rundown of the second part of the Spanish-American War. What happens directly after it, now that we are an imperial power? What do we do with that power and how does it all work? So you can rewind this as much as you need to and go through and make sure you understand the information in red as we continue on with this study of this Unit 2.